The morning sun hadn't fully risen when Officer James Chen pulled into the parking lot of Millbrook Police Department. His newly pressed uniform still had those annoying creases that reminded him just how new he was to all this. The small station, with its brick facade and American flag gently swaying in the morning breeze, looked nothing like the bustling precinct where he'd done his training in the city. Inside, the smell of coffee and donuts filled the briefing room. Chen couldn't help but smile. Some stereotypes existed for a reason. A few officers were already there, most of them looking like they needed that coffee more than air. They barely noticed him as he slipped into a seat near the back, trying his best not to draw attention to himself. First aid jitters? A friendly voice caught his attention. Looking up, he saw Officer Tom Wilson, a guy in his 50s with smile lines around his eyes that showed he laughed a lot. Tom had been assigned as his field training officer, and something about his easygoing nature made Chen feel a bit more relaxed. That obvious, huh? Chen adjusted his collar for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Tom chuckled, settling into the chair next to him. You should have seen me on my first day. Walked into the women's locker room by mistake. Didn't live that down for months. His laugh was infectious, and Chen found himself grinning despite his nerves. The briefing room slowly filled up with more officers, each carrying their own coffee cups and tired smiles. Chen noticed how they all seemed to know each other, sharing inside jokes and asking about each other's families. It made him miss the familiarity of his old city precinct, where he'd at least known the regular faces during his training. Sergeant Mike Rivera walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was carrying a stack of papers and had the look of someone who'd already been up for hours. "All right, folks, let's get started," he announced, his voice cutting through the morning chatter. Chen sat up straighter, notebook ready. This was it, his first real briefing as a full-fledged officer. He watched as Sergeant Rivera went through the usual updates. A couple of stolen bikes, a noise complaint about teenagers in the park, and a reminder about the upcoming community picnic. "And here's something to keep an eye out for," Rivera continued, pulling up a grainy security camera image on the screen. "We got word from the state police about a fugitive possibly heading our way. Male, silver hair, last seen wearing a navy suit. Wanted for investment fraud in 3 states. Not considered dangerous, but definitely slippery." Chen studied the image carefully, jotting down notes. Silver hair, navy suit seemed simple enough. In the city, they dealt with much more complicated cases. This should be straightforward, he thought. After the briefing, Tom caught up with Chen in the parking lot. "Ready to hit the streets, rookie?" he asked, twirling his car keys. "Born ready," Chen replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As they walked to the patrol car, Tom started pointing out little details about their route, which streets usually had speeders, which coffee shop had the best donuts. Another stereotype that made Chen laugh, and which crossing guard liked to chat their ear off. "Small-town policing is different from what you're used to," Tom explained as they pulled out of the lot. "In the city, it's all about responding to calls. Here, it's about knowing your community. These aren't just streets we're patrolling. They're Mrs. Johnson walking her dog every morning at 7, Mr. Patel opening his convenience store, kids heading to school." Chen nodded, taking it all in. He'd chosen Millbrook because he wanted something different from the constant chaos of city police work. Something more personal, where he could really make a difference. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had something to prove. That patrol car cruised down Main Street, passing shops just opening for the day. Chen watched as store owners unlocked their doors, workers hurried to offices, and school buses started their morning routes. It all seemed so peaceful, so different from the sirens and crowds he was used to. "You'll get to know everyone soon enough," Tom assured him, seeming to read his thoughts. "Just remember, in a town like this, reputation matters. One mistake can follow you for a while, but do something good, and they'll remember that too." Little did Chen know just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Throughout the morning, Tom showed him the ropes, how to handle parking disputes without making enemies, the importance of knowing which teenagers were actually troublemakers and which were just hanging out, and why you should never take sides in the ongoing feud between the 2 competing bakeries on Oak Street. "The key is to listen more than you talk," Tom advised as they grabbed coffee during their break. "People here will tell you everything you need to know if you just let them." Chen was soaking it all in, determined to be the kind of officer this town needed. He'd worked too hard to get here to mess it up now. His parents hadn't been thrilled when he'd left his job at their family restaurant to join the police academy, but he knew this was his calling. He wanted to protect people, to serve his community, to make a real difference. As the morning wore on, Chen found himself relaxing a bit. Maybe small-town policing wouldn't be so different after all. He'd already helped an elderly woman change a flat tire, redirected traffic around a minor fender bender, and even rescued a cat from a tree, though that last one wasn't exactly in the police manual. But then came the alert on their radio, possible sighting of the fugitive near the town center. Chen's heart rate picked up. This was his chance to prove himself, to show everyone that the new guy from the city knew what he was doing. Tom noticed his excitement and raised an eyebrow. "Easy there, hotshot. Remember what I said about reputation. Let's handle this by the book." Chen nodded, but his mind was already racing. He'd spent years training for moments like this. In the academy, he'd been top of his class in pursuit and apprehension techniques. One good arrest, and he'd earn the respect of his new colleagues. Show them that he wasn't just some rookie who couldn't cut it in the city. As they turned onto Center Street, Chen's training kicked in. He scanned faces, looking for anyone matching the description. Silver hair, navy suit. How hard could it be to spot someone like that in a small town? What he didn't realize was that his eagerness to prove himself was about to lead to one of the biggest mistakes of his career, one that would change not just his life, but the entire way Millbrook thought about community policing. Tom's words echoed in his head. In a town like this, reputation matters. He had no idea just how true those words would prove to be, or how the next few minutes would test everything he thought he knew about being a police officer. The Wednesday morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across Millbrook's busy streets. Officer Chen sat in the patrol car, fingers drumming against the steering wheel while Tom grabbed them both a quick coffee refill from Betty's diner. His eyes scanned the growing crowd of morning commuters, the training academy's lessons still fresh in his mind. Always be alert, trust your instincts, protect and serve. The town was coming alive with its usual morning bustle. Shop owners swept their sidewalks, kids waited at bus stops with their oversized backpacks, and office workers hurried past with their travel mugs and briefcases. Chen was starting to notice the patterns Tom had mentioned earlier, the same faces, the same routines, the steady rhythm of small-town life. His radio crackled with routine updates. A missed stop sign on Pine Street, a broken traffic light on 4th Avenue, someone's dog getting loose again. Nothing like the constant stream of serious calls he'd gotten used to during his city training. Part of him missed that excitement, that feeling of being right in the thick of things. Tom returned with their coffees, handing one to Chen. "Getting antsy already, rookie?" he asked, noticing Chen's restless energy. "Just trying to stay sharp," Chen replied, taking a sip. The coffee was perfect. Betty really did know how to brew a good cup. Still thinking about that fugitive alert from the briefing. Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Look, I know you're eager to prove yourself, but remember what I said about small towns. Everything's connected here. You can't just..." Before he could finish, something caught Chen's eye. A man in a navy blue suit was walking briskly towards City Hall, silver-haired gleaming in the morning sun. Chen's heart rate jumped. The description matched perfectly, too perfectly to ignore. "Tom, look," Chen pointed discreetly. Navy suit, silver hair, heading toward a government building. Tom turned to look, but before he could respond, Chen was already opening his door. "Hold up," Tom started to say, but Chen was too focused on his target to hear the warning in his voice. The man was walking quickly, head down, completely absorbed in his phone. He looked expensive, tailored suit, leather briefcase, shine shoes clicking against the pavement. Just the type who might be involved in investment fraud, Chen thought. His training kicked in, suspicious behavior, matching description, heading toward a possible escape route. The sidewalks were getting crowded now, early morning shoppers mixing with office workers and parents walking their kids to school. Chen weaved through them, keeping his eyes locked on the man in the suit. His heart was pounding, but his movements were steady, just like he practiced countless times at the academy. The man turned slightly, checking his watch, and Chen caught a glimpse of his face. Distinguished features, probably in his late 50s, with that same silver hair from the security camera image. In Chen's mind, Everything lined up perfectly. This had to be their guy. More people were filling the sidewalk now, and Chen could see his suspect was about to disappear into the crowd. It was now or never. He quickened his pace, one hand moving to his belt, ready to take control of the situation. "Sir," Chen called out, his voice carrying the authority he'd practiced so many times. "Police? I need you to stop right there." The man glanced up from his phone, looking confused but not particularly concerned. He started to say something, probably another excuse or deflection, Chen thought. He'd been warned about this, how the smartest criminals often tried to talk their way out of situations. Several bystanders had stopped to watch, phones already coming out to record what was happening. Chen could feel their eyes on him, but he stayed focused. This was his chance to show everyone that he knew what he was doing. "Sir, please put the phone down and place your hands where I can see them," Chen commanded, moving closer. The man's bewildered expression only made Chen more suspicious. He'd seen that look before, during training scenarios. The look of someone trying to appear innocent while planning their next move. "There must be some mistake," the man said calmly, still holding his phone. "I'm actually—" "Phone down, sir. Now." Chen's voice was firm, unwavering. He could hear Tom's footsteps behind him now, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't risk losing focus, not when he was this close. The crowd was growing larger, and Chen could hear murmurs of confusion and concern. Someone gasped. Another person started saying something about calling someone, but Chen tuned it out. He had to concentrate on the potential threat in front of him. The man slowly lowered his phone, his movements deliberate and calm. Too calm, Chen thought, like someone who'd been in situations like this before. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but if you just let me explain." "Turn around slowly and place your hands behind your back," Chen interrupted, moving into position. The man's continued attempts to talk his way out of the situation only reinforced Chen's suspicion. The crowd's murmuring had grown louder now. Chen could hear snippets of conversations, people speaking in urgent, confused tones. He noticed a few of them were trying to get his attention, but he remained focused on his suspect. This was exactly what they'd warned about in training, how bystanders could distract you at crucial moments. A woman's voice cut through the noise. "But that's there." "Please stay back, ma'am," Chen called out, maintaining his professional tone. "This is a police matter." The man in the suit sighed heavily but complied with Chen's commands, turning around slowly. "Officer, I really think you should." "You have the right to remain silent," Chen began, reaching for his handcuffs. His hands were steady, his movements precise, just like he practiced hundreds of times before. The crowd had grown even larger now, and Chen could hear phones clicking and voices rising. He knew he was being recorded, but that only made him more determined to handle this by the book. Show everyone watching that this was how professional police work was done. As he secured the first handcuff around the man's wrist, he'd heard running footsteps approaching. Tom's voice rang out, but it was too late. The second handcuff was already clicking into place. "Chen, stop." "That's—" And then Chen heard the words that make his blood run cold. A voice from the crowd, loud and clear. "Why are they arresting Mayor Sullivan?" The world seemed to freeze. Chen felt his stomach drop as the reality of what was happening crashed over him like a wave. He looked at Tom, whose expression confirmed his worst fear. The man he'd just handcuffed, the man he'd been so sure was their fugitive, was Robert Sullivan, the mayor of Millbrook, the most recognizable person in town, the man whose picture probably hung in the very police station where Chen had started his morning. The crowd's confusion had turned to a mix of shock and outrage. Phones were everywhere now, recording every excruciating second of Chen's mistake. He could already imagine the headlines, the social media posts, the damage he'd just done to not only his own career, but potentially to the entire department's relationship with the community. In that moment, standing there with his hands still on the handcuffs, Officer James Chen realized that his eagerness to prove himself had just led to exactly the kind of mistake Tom had warned him about. And in a small town like Millbrook, where reputation was everything, he had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of what promised to be a very long and difficult day. The next few moments felt like they were playing out in slow motion. Officer Chen stood frozen, his hands still on the handcuffs that bound the wrists of Mayor Robert Sullivan. The morning sun seemed too bright now, highlighting every detail of this nightmare unfolding in front of City Hall. "Son," Tom's voice cut through the chaos, gentle but firm, "take those cuffs off. Now." Chen's fingers fumbled with the keys, something he'd done smoothly 100 times in training, but now felt impossible. The crowd had formed a complete circle around them, phones recording every excruciating second of his mistake. He could hear whispers, gasps, and even a few angry mutters from the growing audience. "I told you," Mayor Sullivan said calmly, "has Chen worked to remove the handcuffs, if you just let me explain." There wasn't anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse. Just a patient understanding that made Chen feel about 2 inches tall. The handcuffs finally came free, and Mayor Sullivan rubbed his wrists, not for dramatic effect, but out of simple reflex. He turned to face Chen, and for the first time, Chen got a proper look at the man he'd just mistaken for a fugitive. The mayor's kind face and dignified bearing made Chen's mistake seem even more ridiculous. "I'm so sorry, sir," Chen managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought," the description, "your suit." "My suit." Mayor Sullivan glanced down at his navy blue outfit, then back at Chen with an expression that mixed confusion and something that might have been amusement. "The one I wear nearly every day to work." Someone in the crowd called out, "That's our mayor, you idiot." Another voice added, "He's been here longer than you've been alive." Tom stepped between Chen and the increasingly agitated crowd. "All right, folks, let's give everyone some space here. Show's over." But it wasn't over, not even close. Mrs. Peters, who ran the flower shop across the street, was already on her phone, presumably calling everyone she knew. Mr. Rodriguez from the hardware store had his arms crossed, shaking his head in disapproval. These were all people Chen would have to face every day on his patrols, people whose trust he'd need to do his job. "I should call the chief," Tom said quietly, pulling out his phone. Chen's stomach dropped even further. Chief Thompson would be arriving any minute, and this was definitely not how Chen had planned to make his first impression. Mayor Sullivan was straightening his tie when his own phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. "Well, looks like the local news has already gotten wind of this. They work fast in small towns." He looked at Chen with what seemed like genuine sympathy. "First week on the job?" Chen nodded miserably. "First day, actually." "First day?" The mayor raised his eyebrows. "Well, at least you're getting all your big mistakes out of the way early." A few people in the crowd actually chuckled at that, which only made Chen feel worse. He'd wanted to prove himself, to show everyone he could handle small-town policing. Instead, he'd become the morning's entertainment. The sound of another police car's siren cut through the murmuring crowd. Chief Thompson's cruiser pulled up to the curb, and Chen felt his heart sink even further. The chief stepped out, his face unreadable as he took in the scene. "Mayor Sullivan," the chief said, approaching quickly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Dave," the mayor replied, using the chief's first name with the familiarity of old friends. "Just a misunderstanding with your new officer here." The chief turned to Chen, his expression now definitely readable and not happy. "Officer Chen, can't you explain why you handcuffed the mayor of our town?" Chen tried to find the right words, but everything sounded ridiculous now. "The fugitive alert, silver hair, navy suit. I thought. You thought our mayor, who's been serving this community for 12 years, was a fugitive." The chief's voice was calm, but Chen could hear the tension underneath. "To be fair," Mayor Sullivan interjected, "I was walking pretty suspiciously. You know, going to work, checking my phone, the usual criminal behavior." His attempt at humor did little to lighten the chief's mood. More people were gathering now. The morning commute had turned into an impromptu town meeting, with everyone wanting to see what was happening. Chen could hear snippets of conversations. "Can you believe this new cop? Does he even know where he is? What are they teaching at the academy these days?" A news van pulled up, its antenna already rising into the air. A reporter and cameraman jumped out, heading straight for the scene. Chen had never felt more exposed in his life. "Chief," Tom spoke up, "maybe we should continue this discussion back at the station." But before anyone could move, a new voice rang out from the crowd. "Robert Sullivan, is that you causing all this commotion?" An elderly woman pushed through the onlookers, her face bright with amusement. I've been telling you for years that fancy suit makes you look suspicious. It was Mrs. Sullivan, the mayor's mother and one of the town's most beloved residents. She took in the scene with twinkling eyes, immediately grasping what had happened. "Mom," Mayor Sullivan said, "shouldn't you be at your book club? And miss all this excitement? Besides, when else do I get to see my son in handcuffs?" She turned to Chen with a gentle smile. "Don't worry, dear. Robert was quite the troublemaker in his youth. Someone should have arrested him years ago." A few more laughs rippled through the crowd, but Chen couldn't share in the humor. His mind was racing with the implications of what he'd done. Would he be fired? Suspended? Would he ever live this down? Chief Thompson cleared his throat. "Officer Chen, I think you should head back to the station with Officer Wilson. We'll discuss this incident in detail." He turned to the mayor. "Robert, I apologize for—" "No need, Dave," Mayor Sullivan cut him off. "We all make mistakes. Though I have to say, this is a first for me." He straightened his jacket and checked his watch. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a council meeting to attend. Assuming, of course, Officer Chen doesn't need to arrest me again." The gentle teasing in his voice made several people laugh, but Chen could only manage a weak nod. As he followed Tom back to their patrol car, he could hear the news reporter already starting her live broadcast. Breaking news from downtown Millbrook, where a routine morning took an unexpected turn. Chen slid into the passenger seat, feeling like his entire career was crumbling before it had really begun. The crowd was still watching, phones still recording, as Tom pulled away from the curb. "Well," Tom said after a long moment of silence, "remember what I said about reputation in a small town?" Chen just nodded, watching City Hall shrink in the side mirror. "The good news is," Tom continued, "you've definitely made a memorable first impression." As they drove back to the station, Chen couldn't help but wonder if he'd just become the biggest joke in Millbrook's history. Little did he know that this mortifying moment would lead to changes nobody could have predicted. Changes that would reshape not just his career, but the entire relationship between the police department and the community it served. The drive back to the police station felt like the longest 5 minutes of Chen's life. Every traffic light they stopped at seemed to mock him, giving him more time to replay the disaster in his head. Tom kept glancing over at him with a mix of sympathy and concern, but neither of them spoke. What was there to say after you just handcuffed the town's mayor? The station's parking lot was unusually full when they arrived. News had traveled fast, and several reporters were already setting up their equipment outside the building. Chen noticed Betty from the diner standing nearby with her phone out, probably updating her famous local news blog that Tom had mentioned earlier that morning. Had that really only been a few hours ago? "Head straight to the chief's office," Tom advised as they parked. "Don't talk to anyone, don't check your phone, just wait for instructions." Chen nodded, his throat too dry to speak. As they walked into the station, he could feel every eye on him. Officer Reynolds, who'd barely acknowledged his existence during morning briefing, was now staring openly. The dispatch officer, who'd been so friendly earlier, suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. "Did you really not recognize the mayor?" The question came from Officer Kelly, who'd been with the department for 20 years. Her tone wasn't mocking, she seemed genuinely puzzled. Before Chen could answer, Tom stepped in. "Not now, Kelly. Chief's waiting." They made their way to the chief's office, passing the wall of department photos. Chen's eyes caught on one particular frame, a picture of the entire force at last year's community picnic, with Mayor Sullivan front and center, wearing what looked like the exact same Navy suit. Chen felt his face grow hot all over again. The chief's secretary, Mrs. Henderson, gave Chen a look that could only be described as pity. "He's on the phone right now," she said. "Take a seat." Chen sank into one of the hard plastic chairs outside the office while Tom leaned against the wall nearby. Through the chief's door, they could hear fragments of conversation. "Yes, I understand your concern. No, the officer is new. Of course, we take this very seriously." Chen's phone buzzed in his pocket. Against his better judgment, he pulled it out. The local community Facebook group was exploding with posts about the incident. Someone had already uploaded a video titled "Rookie Cop's Biggest Mistake Ever." It had over 1,000 views already. "Don't look at that stuff," Tom warned. "It'll only make you feel worse." The chief's door opened, and Chief Thompson appeared, looking tired despite it not even being noon yet. Chen. Inside. Tom, you too. The office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town police chief: citations on the walls, family photos on the desk, and a window overlooking Main Street where, Chen noticed with a sinking feeling, more news vans were pulling up. "Sit down," the chief said, closing the door. He took his own seat behind the desk and just stared at Chen for what felt like an eternity. "Sir, I can explain," Chen started. "Can you?" The chief's voice was surprisingly calm. "Because I've spent the last hour trying to explain to the town council, the media, and about 50 angry citizens why one of my officers handcuffed the most well-known person in Millbrook." Chen swallowed hard. "I was focused on the fugitive alert. The description matched, and I jumped to conclusions." Jumped to conclusions. The chief leaned back in his chair. "Chen, that man has been mayor since before you finished high school. His picture is in our lobby. He hosts the annual police department barbecue in his own backyard." "I know that now, sir. I should have." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson poked her head in. "Chief, the mayor's office is on line 1, and Channel 5 News wants a statement." The chief rubbed his temples. "Tell the mayor I'll call him back." "And no comments to the press yet." He turned back to Chen. "Do you know what the hardest part of my job is, Officer Chen?" Chen shook his head. "Building trust. In a small town like this, trust is everything. We're not just police officers here. We're neighbors, friends, part of the community. When something like this happens, it doesn't just reflect badly on you or me. It affects the entire department's relationship with the people we serve." Tom spoke up from his corner. "Chief, if I may. Chen's a good officer. He made a mistake, but his instincts were right. He saw something suspicious and acted on it." His instincts. The chief picked up his phone and turned it toward them. The screen showed a social media post with the video of the incident, already up to 5,000 views. His instincts just turned us into a viral sensation, and not the good kind. Another knock at the door. This time it was Officer Kelly. "Chief, you might want to see this." She handed him a tablet showing the local news website. The headline made Chen's stomach turn: "Mayor handcuffed, police profiling or rookie mistake." The chief stepped the tablet down with a sigh. "Chen, I'm placing you on administrative duty effective immediately. No patrol work until we sort this out. You'll be handling desk work, paperwork, and whatever else keeps you away from handcuffs." "Yes, sir," Chen replied quietly. It was better than being fired, at least. "And Chen?" The chief's voice softened slightly. "The next time you think you've identified a suspect, especially in a town this size, maybe run it by your training officer first." Tom cleared his throat. "About that, Chief, I think I bear some responsibility here. I should have been watching more closely, given it was his first day." The chief looked between them, then at the growing crowd of reporters outside his window. "Well, we can't change what happened, but we can control what happens next." He picked up his phone again. "I need to call the mayor back. Chen, go see Mrs. Henderson about your temporary assignment. And for heaven's sake, stay away from social media for a while." As Chen stood to leave, the chief added, "Oh, and Chen, your parents' restaurant. Golden Dragon, right?" Chen nodded, surprised the chief knew about it. "Might want to give them a heads up. In a town this size, they'll be hearing about this soon enough." Chen's heart sank even further. He hadn't even thought about his parents yet. His father had been skeptical about him becoming a police officer in the first place. This would just prove him right. Back at his desk, Chen found a stack of paperwork waiting for him. As he sat down, he could hear other officers talking in hushed voices, their conversations stopping whenever they walked past his desk. His computer screen showed several new email notifications, including one from the department's public relations officer, marked Urgent. The day wasn't even half over, but Chen felt like he'd aged years. As he started on the paperwork, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever live this down, if he'd ever be able to walk through Millbrook without being known as that cop who arrested the mayor. What he didn't know was that across town, in the mayor's office, Robert Sullivan was having a very different kind of conversation, one that would change everything, not just for Chen, but for the entire Millbrook Police Department. By the time evening rolled around, Chen's mistake had become the talk of Millbrook. The video had spread far beyond their small town, catching the attention of national news outlets. The desk duty assignment felt like a blessing in disguise. At least he didn't have to face the public right now. The sun was setting outside the station windows as Chen sorted through another stack of parking tickets. His phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from former academy classmates who'd seen the video. Even his sister had sent him a text. Mom and Dad saw the news. Maybe not the best time to come for Sunday dinner this week. Officer Kelly stopped by his desk, coffee cup in hand. Her earlier puzzlement had softened into something closer to sympathy. Here, she said, placing the cup in front of him. You look like you could use this. Thanks, Chen mumbled, grateful for the small kindness. You know, Kelly said, perching on the edge of his desk, my first week, I gave a parking ticket to the chief's wife. Right in front of the whole Sunday church crowd. Chen looked up, managing a small smile. How long did it take for people to forget about it? Oh, they still bring it up at department Christmas parties, she chuckled. But that's small-town life for you. Everything's a big deal until the next big deal comes along. From across the room, they heard the TV news running yet another segment about the incident. The reporter was interviewing people on Main Street, and the responses weren't kind. How can we trust the police if they don't even know our mayor? It's like they're not even trying to be part of the community. My taxes pay for this? Chen turned back to his paperwork, trying to block out the voices, but Kelly wasn't done. You know what your real mistake was? Besides handcuffing the mayor? Chen asked dryly. No, your real mistake was thinking you could come to a small town and treat it like the city. We do things differently here. It's not just about enforcing laws, it's about knowing the people you're protecting. Before Chen could respond, Tom appeared at his desk. Chen got a minute. They walked to the break room, which was mercifully empty. Tom closed the door behind them. I just got off the phone with my wife. She works at the elementary school. Chen braced himself for more bad news. The kids are playing a new game at recess, Tom continued, trying not to smile. They're pretending to arrest each other, calling themselves Officer Chen. You're famous with the third-grade crowd. Despite everything, Chen couldn't help but laugh. It came out sounding more like a desperate release of tension than actual humor. Listen, Tom said, his tone turning serious. I know you're thinking about resigning. Half the department's betting you won't last the week. Chen had indeed been thinking about it. The resignation letter was already drafted on his phone, just waiting to be sent. But before you do anything, Tom continued, I want you to remember something. Every cop in this building has made mistakes. Maybe not as public as yours, but mistakes nonetheless. What matters isn't the mistake, it's how you handle what comes after. A knock on the break room door interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson poked her head in. Chen, there's someone here to see you. Chen's heart sank. Another reporter? An angry citizen? Maybe even his parents. But when he walked back to his desk, he found Mr. Wu from the Chinese restaurant across from City Hall waiting for him. The elderly man was holding a large paper bag that smelled amazing. Young man, Mr. Wu said, setting the bag on Chen's desk. My wife saw what happened this morning. She says you look too skinny, need to eat more. Chen opened the bag to find it full of his favorite dishes, the ones he'd grown up eating at his own family's restaurant. The simple gesture of kindness nearly brought tears to his eyes. Thank you, he managed to say. But aren't you worried about being seen bringing food to the cop who arrested the mayor? Mr. Wu shrugged. Mayor Sullivan comes to my restaurant every Tuesday. Always orders the same thing, always tells bad jokes. This morning, he still came in, laughed about what happened, paid his bill like normal. If he's not angry, why should I be? As Mr. Wu left, Chen noticed other officers eyeing the food enviously. The aroma of authentic Chinese cuisine had filled the entire office. After a moment's hesitation, he started sharing it around. This is incredible, Officer Kelly said between bites of kung pao chicken. Way better than the takeout place by the highway. My parents' restaurant makes it better, Chen said automatically, then winced at the mention of his family. All right, Golden Dragon. Another officer joined the conversation. Best dumplings in 3 counties. Your dad still make them by hand. Chen nodded, surprised they knew such details about his family's business. As they ate, the conversation shifted from his morning mistake to favorite local restaurants, then to funny stories about other officers' early days on the force. The tension in the room began to ease, just slightly, but enough to notice. Later that evening, as Chen was finally preparing to head home, Chief Thompson called him back into his office. The chief looked tired, but less angry than he had that morning. Got some interesting calls today, the chief said, gesturing for Chen to sit. Know what they were about? Chen shook his head. People calling to defend you. Mr. Wood from the restaurant, Mrs. Lee from the library, even old Mr. Peterson who complains about everything. They all said the same thing. You're a good kid from a good family, and maybe we should give you a chance to prove yourself. Chen sat in stunned silence. Seems like your parents raised you right, even if they didn't raise you to recognize the mayor, the chief continued with a hint of a smile. The question is, what are you going to do now? Before Chen could answer, his phone buzzed with a news alert. His heart nearly stopped when he read the headline, Mayor Sullivan calls press conference for tomorrow morning. Police relations to be discussed. The chief saw his expression. Ah, you saw it too. Well, Officer Chen, looks like tomorrow's going to be another interesting day. Go home, get some rest. And Chen? Yes, sir? Maybe wear a different uniform tomorrow. That one still has creases in it. As Chen drove home that night, past the familiar streets that now felt so different, he couldn't help but wonder what the mayor had planned. The day's events played through his mind on repeat. The handcuffs, the crowd, the news reports, but also Mr. Wu's kindness, his fellow officers' stories, and the chief's surprising support. What he didn't know was that Mayor Sullivan had spent his entire day laying the groundwork for something that would change not just Chen's future, but the entire relationship between the police department and the community. Tomorrow's press conference would be about much more than just a rookie cop's embarrassing mistake. It would be about turning that mistake into an opportunity for real change. The next morning, City Hall's steps were packed with people. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching into the crisp morning air. Chen stood at the back of the crowd in his freshly pressed uniform, trying to be invisible, which wasn't easy when half the town kept glancing his way. Tom stood beside him, a silent show of support. They'd arrived early, watching the crowd grow larger by the minute. Betty from the diner was there with her famous notebook, ready to update her blog. Mr. Wu had closed his restaurant for the morning to attend. Even Chen's parents had shown up, standing nervously near the back, his mother gripping his father's arm. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, Chen muttered, seeing more familiar faces arrive. I could watch it on TV from the station. No, Tom said firmly. Whatever happens, you face it head-on. That's what good cops do. The murmuring crowd fell silent as Mayor Sullivan appeared at the podium. He looked exactly as he had yesterday, down to the navy blue suit. Chen wondered if he'd worn it on purpose. Good morning, the mayor began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. I'm sure you all know why we're here. Yesterday morning, an incident occurred that has gotten quite a bit of attention. Cameras clicked and whirred. Chen could feel his pulse in his ears. A young police officer, new to our community, mistook me for a fugitive and proceeded to handcuff me right here on these steps. The mayor paused, looking around at the crowd. And since then, I've heard a lot of opinions about what should happen next. Chen held his breath. This was it. He was about to become the cautionary tale they told at the police academy. Some people, the mayor continued, have called for immediate dismissal. Others have demanded policy changes, additional training, even department-wide reviews. He adjusted his tie, a gesture Chen now recognized as a habit. But before I address any of that, I'd like to tell you a story about another police officer who made a mistake. The crowd shifted, curious. This wasn't what anyone had expected. 40 years ago, in this very town, a rookie cop pulled over a car for speeding. The driver was rushing his pregnant wife to the hospital. Instead of escorting them, the officer insisted on writing a ticket. That woman was my mother, and I was the baby she was in such a hurry to deliver. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Mrs. Sullivan, standing near the front, nodded in confirmation. That officer was my father. The revelation caused a stir. Chen looked at Tom in surprise, but his training officer just smiled knowingly. Yes, the mayor continued, my father was a police officer in this very department for 30 years. And that ticket, that mistake he made, it became a family legend. He kept it framed in his office as a reminder that even with the best intentions, we all make mistakes. The important thing is what we learn from them. The mayor stepped away from the podium, walking to the edge of the steps where he could better see the crowd. Yesterday, Officer Chen made a mistake. He saw someone matching a suspect's description and took action. Was it the wrong action? Yes. Was it done with bad intentions? No. He was doing what he was trained to do, protect and serve. Chen felt his father's hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. But here's what Officer Chen didn't know, the mayor continued. He didn't know that I coach Little League on Saturdays. He didn't know that I have coffee every morning at Betty's Diner, or that I help Mr. Wu unload his deliveries on Tuesdays, or that I'm a regular at Golden Dragon, which, by the way, makes the best dumplings in the state. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Chen's mother beamed at the mention of their restaurant. He didn't know these things because he's new here, because we haven't given him the chance to become part of our community. And that's not just his failure, it's ours. The mayor returned to the podium, his expression serious. This morning, I met with Chief Thompson and the town council. We discussed various ways to address yesterday's incident, but instead of punishment, we've decided to use this as an opportunity for change. He pulled out a document from his briefcase. I'm announcing today the creation of the Millbrook Community Integration Program. Every new officer joining our force will spend their first month not just learning our streets and laws, but learning our community. They'll attend town events, meet with business owners, visit schools, and yes, even learn which mayor not to handcuff. Laughter broke out, releasing some of the tension in the air. Officer Chen will help develop this program, using his experience to ensure other new officers don't face the same challenges he did. Because sometimes the best teachers are the ones who learn their lessons the hard way. Chen felt dozens of eyes turn to him, but for the first time since yesterday morning, the looks weren't entirely hostile. Now, some of you might think I'm being too lenient, that there should be consequences for yesterday's actions. Well, there are consequences. Officer Chen will have to live with this story for the rest of his career. Trust me, my father never lived down that speeding ticket, and I'm pretty sure being handcuffed is a bit more memorable. More laughter, and Chen found himself smiling despite everything. But he'll also have the chance to turn this mistake into something positive, to help create a program that will make our police force stronger, our community closer, and our town better. The mayor looked directly at Chen now. Officer Chen, would you join me up here? Chen froze. Tom gave him a gentle push forward. Go on, he whispered. This is your chance. Walking to the podium felt like the longest journey of Chen's life. Every step was accompanied by the click of cameras and the murmur of the crowd. But when he reached the mayor's side, he saw something unexpected in the older man's eyes, not anger or resentment, but understanding. Officer Chen, Mayor Sullivan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you willing to help us build this program? To use your experience to make sure other officers have a better start in our community? Chen looked out at the crowd. He saw his parents' proud faces, Tom's encouraging nod, Betty's furious note-taking, Mr. Wu's gentle smile. He saw his fellow officers, the community members he'd need to work with, the people he'd need to protect and serve. Taking a deep breath, he stepped to the microphone and said the words that would change not just his future, but the future of policing in Millbrook. Yes, sir, I'd be honored. What happened next would become another piece of Millbrook legend, how a mistake turned into a mission, how embarrassment became opportunity, and how one very public error led to one of the most successful community policing programs in the state. 3 years later, on a sunny spring morning, much like the one that had changed everything, Officer James Chen stood in front of a new group of police recruits in the Millbrook Community Center. The room was filled with fresh faces, all eager to start their careers in law enforcement. Welcome to Millbrook, Chen began, unable to hide his smile. I'm Officer Chen, and I'll be leading your community integration training for the next month. Some of you might recognize my name. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Of course they recognized it. The story had become part of police academy folklore, shared in break rooms and training sessions across the state. The video still popped up occasionally on social media, usually with captions like, "How note to start your police career." "Yes, I'm that Officer Chen," he continued, leaning against his desk. "The one who handcuffed Mayor Sullivan on his way to work. And that's exactly why I'm here talking to you today." He clicked through to the first slide of his presentation, showing a photo of Millbrook's Main Street. "3 years ago, I thought I knew everything about being a good police officer. I had the training, the skills, the dedication. What I didn't have was the most important thing: I didn't know my community." The fresh-faced recruits took notes eagerly. Chen noticed Tom standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, proud smile on his face. After 3 years, he was still Chen's biggest supporter. "But thanks to one very embarrassing mistake and one very understanding mayor, we created something special here in Millbrook. Something that's changed how we think about community policing." He walked over to the window, gesturing at the busy street outside. "See that coffee shop across the street? That's Betty's Dinner. Betty knows every piece of gossip in town, but she also knows which kids might need a free meal or which elderly residents haven't been seen in a while. That information is more valuable than any police database." He pointed to another building. "Mr. Wu's restaurant? He stays open late on weekends to give teenagers a safe place to hang out. He's probably prevented more crimes by feeding hungry kids than we have by writing tickets." The recruits nodded, some taking photos of the presentation slides. "This isn't just about avoiding mistakes like mine. It's about understanding that real police work isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about being part of the community you serve." Chen clicked to the next slide, showing pictures from various community events. "Over the next month, you'll attend town council meetings, volunteer at the food bank, help coach Little League games, and yes, you'll learn to recognize Mayor Sullivan." More laughter. The mayor's navy blue suit had become something of a running joke in town. "But more importantly, you'll learn the stories behind the faces you'll protect and serve, because when you know those stories, you make better decisions. You become a better officer." Just then, the community center's door opened, and Mayor Sullivan himself walked in. 3 years older but still sporting his signature navy suit, he smiled at the recruits. "Ah, perfect timing," Chen said. "Mayor Sullivan has been kind enough to join us for this part of the training. He's got quite a story to tell about his first interaction with a certain rookie officer." The mayor walked to the front of the room, shaking Chen's hand warmly. Their awkward first meeting had evolved into a genuine friendship, built on shared humility and a commitment to making their community better. "Officer Chen is being modest," the mayor addressed the recruits. "What he's not telling you is that our community integration program has become a model for departments across the state. Last month, we had visitors from 3 different cities wanting to learn how we do things here." Chen thought back to those first difficult days after the incident. The embarrassment, the viral video, the doubt about his future in law enforcement. If someone had told him then that his biggest mistake would lead to his greatest achievement, he would never have believed them. The mayor continued, "Thanks to this program, our department's community approval ratings are at an all-time high. Crime rates are down, community engagement is up, and we haven't had a single incident of mistaken identity since, well, you know." He winked at Chen, who took the gentle teasing in stride. These days, he could laugh about it too. After the presentation, Chen walked the recruits around town, introducing them to various community members. They stopped at Betty's for coffee, where she regaled them with the story of that famous morning, now embellished with details that Chen was pretty sure hadn't actually happened. At Mr. Wu's restaurant, the owner insisted on feeding everyone lunch, just as he had done for Chen on that difficult day 3 years ago. Some of the recruits were surprised to see how many regular customers greeted Officer Chen by name, asking about his family or sharing local news. "This is what real community policing looks like," Chen explained as they walked back to the station. "It's not just about knowing the streets, it's about knowing the people who live on them." Back at his desk later that afternoon, Chen found a note from Chief Thompson. "Good job with the new recruits. Your father stopped by the station, says you're still coming for Sunday dinner?" Chen smiled. His relationship with his parents had actually improved since the incident. His father, who'd been skeptical about his career choice, now proudly told restaurant customers about his son's role in creating the community integration program. As he prepared to head home, Chen passed the department's wall of photos. The picture of his handcuffing incident was there now, placed deliberately next to the current photo of the entire force with community leaders. The contrast between the two images told the story of how far they'd come. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's main street. Chen watched as families walked to dinner, teenagers headed to the park, and shopkeepers closed up for the day. He knew most of them now, their names, their stories, their connections to the community. A patrol car pulled up and Tom rolled down the window. "Hey, rookie," he called out, still using the old nickname even though Chen had long since earned his stripes. "Want to grab coffee? Betty says she's got some interesting news about that new development project." Chen laughed. Some things in Millbrook never changed. Betty would always have the latest gossip, Mr. Wu would always feed anyone who looked hungry, and the mayor would always wear that navy suit. But other things had changed for the better. What had started as one officer's embarrassing mistake had grown into something that made their whole community stronger. And every time Chen helped train new recruits, every time he shared his story, he was reminded that sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes. As he walked to Betty's with Tom, Chen caught his reflection in a store window. The nervous rookie in the creased uniform was gone, replaced by a confident officer who knew his community inside and out. And if anyone had told him 3 years ago that handcuffing the mayor would turn out to be the best mistake he ever made, he wouldn't have believed them. But that's the thing about small towns like Millbrook. They have a way of turning mistakes into miracles as long as you're willing to learn from them.